So I want to start today with something that all of us have in common, and that is a credential of some sort. And so what I want you to do, so what you see up here is my high school diploma. It's very fancy, it's got calligraphy, it's on a piece of papyrus. And what I want you to do is I want you to think of a credential that you have, right? And I want you to think about right now, as you're sitting in your seats here at TEDx, I want you to think about where that credential is. So I can tell you that mine sits in a poster roll at the bottom of my wardrobe, kind of in between all of my shoes. I don't take it out very much, other than for taking this picture. It probably hadn't seen the light of day until about 10 years ago when I needed it for immigration purposes. It's actually quite in terms of a recognition of learning, it actually doesn't recognize very much learning because it's quite monolithic. It just says, yes, you did this for 4 years. And if I looked at my bachelor's degree or if I looked at my master's degree, it would say the same thing. You did this for 3 years, you did this for 2 years. Now I could go and I could get out, haul out my, my transcript, and that would give you a little bit more information about what I actually did in order to achieve this larger credential. But basically what we do when we hand out credentials like this is that we're kind of saying to everyone, I don't care what your learning journey was, but you're all going to get painted with the exact same brush. And we have examples, analog examples, of how we could actually be much more granular about credentialing. So what you see here is badges that we're all familiar with from the scouting movement. So Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts have badges. And they recognize skills that these scouts have learned and the achievements that they've earned. And what they do is they collect them all and then they put them in a place where they can actually display them. Once you've got your sewing badge, you can actually sew them onto a sash. And this is great, but it shares one of the kind of limitations in terms of credentialing with the previous artifact that I was showing you, the previous credentialing artifact, which is that they're both physical objects. And these days, where we live in this kind of digital network world, they're actually quite difficult to share. You'd have to take a photo like this and then upload it somewhere where you would hope that people would see it in order to see which different skills you had accumulated. You're probably familiar with digital badges. If you're learning a second language, you might use an app like Duolingo, and Duolingo kind of has a gamification element where it gives you badges as you kind of level up. And this is great, and most of us will be familiar with digital badges. You might be a Foursquare user, or you might be playing a player of video games. But what you want is to actually be able, as the learner at the center of all of those different learning experiences, what you would like is for you to be able to actually draw all of those badges out and put them in one place. But because these badges don't talk to each other, it actually becomes quite difficult. And this is where the Open Badges movement comes in. So in 2011, the Mozilla Foundation recognized that with this kind of emergence of digital badges as a form of credential, there were some problems in terms of portability, being able to take badges from one system to another, but also some problems with verification. How do we know that the person who earned this badge is actually the person that earned this badge? How do we know what this badge actually stands for? So there were some problems, and what they decided to do is they decided to get into a project called the Open Badges Project, and they developed something called the Open Badges Infrastructure. The Open Badges Infrastructure consists of a number of standards and technological innovations that allow people to issue badges that will actually talk to each other. Badges that can be issued through one platform, that can be taken out of that platform and moved into a different platform. So what you see here is actually the anatomy of an open badge. And as you can see, it's at its most basic level, it is an image file. So it is a regular PNG file. And I don't want to get in too much into the technical details, but basically it is a PNG file. But inside that PNG file, there's metadata encoded that sits inside a JSON file. So the two are kind of meshed together in what is called badge baking. Yeah, that's what it's called, badge baking. So when you create a badge, you're actually baking a badge. And in the same way that you bake a cake, once you bake the badge, the two things cannot be separated again. You can't take the ingredients out anymore. And so what we see here is that this badge contains important information that you need in order to kind of see what that badge stands for. So it has a short description of what the badge is. It has a name for the badge. And it also details what the criteria were that the learner had to meet in order to be awarded that badge. And then it has another really important field, which is for evidence. So what it shows is, what you can put in there is either a description of the evidence that the earner submitted in order to be issued the badge, or you could add a link that points to where that evidence is, perhaps in an e-portfolio or in some other place. And then it's got some other information around tags, etc. But another interesting part of the badge is this idea of a date when it was issued. So it actually tells you when that date was issued, and if there is an expiration on that badge, so say it was like a Red Cross badge or for CPR, that's something that you need to keep up to date every year. And so this is a badge that could be expired. It doesn't mean that that badge will disappear from the earner's collection, but it actually means that at that point it will be shown to be expired. It's still there, and at that point that person would be required to earn a new badge. So in order to kind of demonstrate or illustrate how this kind of issuing system works, I thought that I would use a very hypothetical example. So by using today's event on, how would badges work around an event like today? So like I said, this is hypothetical. There will not be badges at the end of today, okay? So we're here today, and say that the TED organization decided that they wanted to start issuing open badges for people's participation in TEDx events. So they might start quite small and say, we're going to issue 4 badges. We're going to issue badges for organizers. We're going to issue badges for audience members. We're going to issue badges to speakers and to volunteers. Okay, so they would just decide that what those badges are going to look like, and they'd probably use their own branding in order to kind of show what they, how they work, to link it back to their organization and to tie it into their organization so that they are not just visible as the issuer of the badge once you go into the metadata, but so that they are also visible as the issuer of that badge once you just see the actual image file. And in order to bake these badges and in order to issue them, they could do it by hand, they could do some hand coding, but what they actually could do is use technologies that already exist. So there are a lot of platforms that have arisen. So badges have only been around, well, the project started in 2011, badges kind of started to emerge in 2012, but already there are many platforms around that will let you bake a badge. So you could look at platforms like Credly, Achievery, Badge List. Anyone can go there and they could start to bake a badge and start to issue it to people. So they might use a platform like that, or they might have their own learning management system. So most of your learning management systems will actually work with this open badge standard. So if you use something like Moodle or Blackboard or Totra, it will already let you bake your badges. Now, today's proceedings conclude, and the videos have been successfully uploaded to YouTube, and this is a signal to the TED organization that this event is complete, and it is now time to actually recognize the people that were involved in the event with a badge. And so what they would do is they will then go into their system and actually issue this badge to the people who participated. So Robert, you would be getting a badge, you would be getting an email, either an email that points you to the system and lets you go there and actually go and collect that badge, or that email might actually have the badge attached to it. That would be the image file, but it would have that data encoded in it. Now, at the point that you get that, you might think like, well, what do I do with it now? It's just sitting there in my email box. And that brings up an important point. If you're going to have badges, then you need a place to keep them. And to this end, part of the open badge infrastructure is this idea of an open backpack. So anybody can go to openbadges.org and set up their open backpack there. But in fact, many of the systems that I mentioned earlier let you set up a backpack as well, and that's a place where you can keep all of your badges. As a badge earner, you can actually decide where you're going to put those badges. Now, this is where it becomes interesting. Up until this point, this whole badge issuing has been quite private. It has been a matter between you and the issuer. However, at this point, once it is in your open backpack, you can decide to make some of those badges publicly visible. And then you can start to push them to different places where you might want to display them. Your LinkedIn profile, your blog, maybe Facebook, but someplace where you would like people to see what you have achieved. And then that is where people who are interested in that, potential employers, potential colleagues, other peers, people who want to work with you on a research project, would see what it is that you have. Now, one badge for one successfully managed TEDx event doesn't actually tell you that much. However, what if Robert had also last year helped organize a school's conference? What if he is actually involved in the startup community and somehow does a lot of work around that? Slowly, as those badges build up, a single badge paints a very small picture, but as you start to collect those badges, kind of the paint starts to layer up, and all of a sudden this kind of picture emerges of someone who's very much a community organizer, and in fact probably a community leader. Okay, so what does that mean if you're a learner? What does it mean to actually start earning these badges? Well, one of the things that it will allow you to do is it will allow you to actually start collecting and seeing this tapestry of skills and achievements that you have. So now what you can do is you can not only look behind you and see everything that you've achieved, you can also start to see kind of emerging themes within those skills. And what you can do is you can actually start to strike out into the future. You can start to use the badges not just as a legacy of where you've been already, but you can also start to strike out for other badges that actually become like your way markers that you strive out for. One of the things that we've seen over the last 10 years, if you've been working in education in any kind of role, is that all of our work has changed tremendously. So 10 years ago, we didn't have Google Docs, we didn't have iPads, we didn't have maker spaces, and yet now we're all supposed to know about these things and incorporate them in our work. And in order to do this, many of us have turned to many types of informal learning. So we've started to build our own personal learning networks. We've done a tremendous amount of work. And that's been very helpful to us, and it's helped us to actually do our jobs on a day-to-day basis. But we haven't been recognized for that work. And that's where I feel that the badges really, the open badges, really become almost like the missing link. It was the thing that was missing from that network learning. It is something that is now starting to be possible to actually credential people for that informal learning. So who would do that? Well, for instance, there are quite a few MOOCs now who will issue you with an open badge. So if you've been a lecturer and you've been doing a lot of online facilitation, for instance, some of my colleagues, Whitney Kilgore and Robin Bartoletti, are currently running a MOOC called the Human MOOC, and it is about humanizing online instruction. One of the badges you can earn in their course is an instructional presence badge. So if you already have evidence that this is something that you've been doing for the last 3 years, you can go into their MOOC and you can actually apply for that badge. So that's kind of what it means for learners. It means that you can start to collect badges that show a much more complex and a much more granular pictures of your skills and achievements. Now, what does it mean for if you are working in an organization that starts to issue badges? A school, training organization. It basically means that you don't no longer decide kind of what the linear path is or what the set of hoops are that people have to jump through. What you do is you actually create these various places that people can go, various badges that people might go, and then it's actually the learner that decides what their pathway is. So what I've described here is just one kind of, possible pathway, and someone might not do all the badges. They may not need to do all the badges. As an organization, you might stipulate that they need to do some things, but they don't need to do everything. And that some of these badges are mandatory, but others are voluntary. And so somebody doesn't always have to start at the bottom. You don't have to start with the lowest badge. You can, stretch, struggle, as we've heard earlier. Everyone should be struggling. You might reach out for that badge that might just be kind of beyond your reach, and see whether you can reach it. And if you can't, then you can always drop back. And what you can also do as an organization is that when you notice that people aren't achieving this badge, it's a badge that's not being earned by the people that you're issuing badges to, then you can decide to actually maybe put several different badges underneath it. Because badges can become stackable. So you can have 3 badges that actually stack on top of each other and then lead to a larger badge. Now, so far this has all been quite hypothetical, so I'd like to show you a real-life example. This is a badge system that was rolled out by Core Education last year for Connected Educator Month. They decided to start very small, and this is, I think, is something that I would encourage everyone to do once you start to get interested in open badges, is to start quite small and then start rolling them out and then start to kind of iterate on what you've already got. So what you see here, so Core Education are in New Zealand. They're an education technology consulting firm and training provider. And so they decided that because New Zealand has a bicultural culture, they decided that there were going to be English badges and there were going to be Maori badges. They stand for the same skill, but either you kind of want to identify with one side or the other. And they were quite simple. So one of them was for around Twitter, another one was for being a blogger during Connected Educator Month, and another one was about creating a multimedia artifact. But this is what they look like. As you can see, they've got a very similar kind of visible look, and if you click on any of those badges, then you can see what that badge actually stands for. And so once you start to roll out a badge system like that, what you can do is you can take a lean startup approach to the badge. So this means that you've got an idea about what might work and what your community of learners would be interested in. And then you actually start to kind of build that. And then you would start to put it in the field, so the badges go out into the field, and that's where you start to measure it. You start to see whether people are actually interested in it, right? From that, you actually start to get some data, and then from that, you can learn and kind of you keep going around in that circle in order to kind of see what it is that your badge system needs. And so you might think initially that this is what your badge system should look like. But quite quickly, you'll find that some of these badges weren't useful, and you might start to take them out. You might start to put other badges in. And so what you can see is that there's a really kind of dynamic program starting to occur now that is much finer than the big monolithic programs that we see particularly in higher education, programs that don't like degrees, but that only get reviewed maybe every 3 to 5 years. If you're working in a kind of badge nature, then what you'll see is that this could be turned over kind of within weeks or maybe even within months. So what does this mean for kind of the traditional credentialers in our system? What does this mean for the universities and schools if we kind of look at these open badges as a type of currency for learning? Then it feels like suddenly everyone's got a license to print money. And so what does that mean for these people who traditionally were the only ones who could print money? Well, in a way, they're actually really well off because they're really well positioned with the work that they've done over the decades and centuries in order to actually take advantage of open badges. And we're certainly seeing that with Purdue University in the United States and here in Victoria with Deakin University, who've really taken to badges, and particularly looking at badges in order to make visible those soft skills, things like graduate learning outcomes, employability, critical thinking skills, etc. Things that maybe before were kind of hidden within these larger monolithic programs, but that now we can make visible not just to employers, but also to the students themselves. It's no longer kind of hidden inside the learning outcomes that are somewhere in your course guide. It actually becomes this very visible badge that as a student, you can kind of strike out for. The other reason that traditional credentialing institutions are actually really well set up for a badged world is because they already have a lot of experience in learning design, and they already have a lot of experience in rigorous assessment and assessment practices. Plus, they've already been quality assured by the government. So they enjoy a kind of trust status inside our world that other people who are maybe looking to get in the game actually have to kind of still build up these kind of trust relationships. And in fact, there's some interesting work that's been done in Scotland looking at employers saying, what do you think about open badges? And although people are interested, they say, I don't know what the badge means. If somebody comes to me and they say, I've got a bachelor's degree in this, from this and this university, I know what that means. But if somebody says, I got 10 badges from this MOOC and this other MOOC and from this training provider, then I don't know what that means. And so there's a bit of work that needs to be done there around trust networks and for those trust networks to kind of grow again. But there are some really large players who already have large trust networks that are starting to get into the game. So Disney has a big education program, and they started to issue open badges as part of the education program. NASA is another one who's got into the game. And it's not just these kind of really big organizations that have an opportunity here to actually start moving into this education field and to start providing this kind of learning to students. It is also people who work in niche areas, for instance, or areas where there is great demand. So a friend of mine is a UX designer, and he's just set up a UX design training company in Melbourne. And because this is all still very new, but there's a high demand for it, he's decided to set up a training program and wants to badge it, and so that people can actually, show what UX aspects they've mastered. And once you've collected all 5 badges, then you actually get the big badge of being a UX designer. So anybody can really kind of get in on this game. And the thing is that once he enjoys the trust of other UX design specialists, and those people start sending their teams to him in order to be trained, then automatically his trust will start to rise, and that also increases the value of the badge that he starts to, the badge that he issues. And there are even bigger players, but also unexpected players that we see. So in the United States, the Badge Alliance, so a lot of people who used to work on the original Mozilla project actually moved into something called the Badge Alliance, have started to work around this, began work in 2013 with the city of Chicago in order to develop something called the Summer of Learning. And the idea was to issue badges to students for learning activities that they did over the summertime. And it didn't mean that they were recreating entire new educational programs. Rather, what they were doing is they were building a badge system on top of, holiday schools and camps that were already there, after-school activities that were already in existence. And what they started to do was to actually say, we will give you a system in order to credential this and make it more formal and let the students actually collect badges as they do all of this work over the summer. And so this has been really interesting because after the Summer of Learning, which was so successful, 100,000 students participated, the city of Chicago then decided, actually, we're going to be a city of learning. We're going to keep this going around the year. And by now, there's another 10 cities that have signed up in the United States. We haven't got any cities in Australia yet. I did make a big punt for it at Melbourne Knowledge Week last year. But it actually doesn't take a lot in order to set something like that up. It just requires a few organizations to start working together in order to start building a system like that. And the Badge Alliance is very helpful in letting you do that. So that kind of brings me to the end of my talk. What I would like to do is just acknowledge that this is a very new technology. And I think in terms of the educational innovations we've seen that have been driven by the internet or driven by emerging technologies, I think it is one of the ones that it actually really goes to the base of the existing structures and really challenges the existing status quo in the way that we do learning and the way that we organize education. And so there are a lot of questions about this, who verifies what? Won't there be a lot of duplication work done? People do, rolling out similar badges, etc. And those criticisms are all fair. And, as people start to use badges, we'll be answering those questions and we'll be seeing what the solutions are. We need to dare to fail. But I think the other thing is not to underestimate what the power of this can actually be. So for me, one of the things that I get really excited about is to think that not only will a learner be able to actually see what their lifelong learning pathway was, see where it was and see where it is that they're going, but what happens if we actually start to make visible and measurable what everyone's learning pathways are? What if we can see, all these people who've become UX designers, what was their learning pathway? Yes, maybe they did a bachelor's degree in computer science, maybe they did a bachelor's degree in graphic design, but what are the other commonalities that they've been working on? Maybe they've got exceptional communication skills, and this is something that they haven't been doing, but now if I want to become a UX designer, all of a sudden I'll become aware of the fact that this is one of the things that I need to strive for. So I think this idea of this, being able to actually kind of see what people's learning pathways really are, that's something that becomes really exciting. And so for us, what happens is that with open badges, what we can start to do is we can actually start to provide people, not with the different colors, but what we do is we actually provide them with the different paints with which they can then paint their own learning experience. Thank you very much.